So in this session, I'm going to talk a little bit about a new feature we call host profiles. So as you guys probably know, provisioning is already a much simpler process in a virtualized environment. You don't have to wait for new hardware, you can deploy virtual machine from templates, you can clone them, etc. So what we're doing now is we're making it even simpler for ESX hosts to be provisioned with a technology that, as I called out before, is called host profiles. So that when you add capacity to your data center, it now becomes a trivial, fairly automatic task. And you can make sure that you are staying in compliance with your deployment policies by ensuring consistency. So with host profiles, everything is about your host, the hardware and networking configuration, and it's all saved in a profile, shockingly called the host profile. The host profile can be associated with a cluster, so when you add capacity to your cluster, the host profile is automatically applied to that new host. So let me go ahead and show you here how it's done. So the first thing I want to do is actually set up a host profile. So from the home page within the VI client, I'm going to select the host profiles. And in host profiles, I have the option to create a profile, as there are none created right now. So I click on the Create Profile button and the wizard begins. You have two options here. You can create a profile from an existing host, or you can actually import a profile that may have been saved from a previous creation. In this case, we're going to create one from an existing host. So we'll go into select the host, and of course it populates the list with multiple hosts that are actually in my data center. I'm going to use ESX22 as my baseline host. It's going to ask me for a profile name, in which I'm going to actually give it a name. And of course I can also give it a description. And then finish. So you'll notice down here that create host profile is in progress. And now that profile now shows up on my list of host profiles. So at this point I could select the baseline profile that I just created, and it's going to give me a summary of what the basic settings are that are included within that actual host profile. So in this particular summary, what I'd like you to notice is I'm going to actually highlight the rule set for the software iSCSI client. It is currently not enabled. Well, for the purposes of our host profile, I'd like to actually have that enabled. So in this case, I can go ahead and edit that profile and modify those settings to fit my needs. So I'm going to go in, select Edit Profile, go to Firewall Configuration, go to the Rule Set Configuration, scroll down a little bit, go to the Software iSCSI Client, configure that rule set, and I'm going to click Enable. Then I'm going to say OK. So at that point, if I scroll back down, you can see here it's actually been enabled. So that's basically host profiles as far as editing and creating. Now, to this point, I've done two things. A, I've created a baseline host profile based on ESX22A. And B, I've edited that very profile and made a modification to that. So at this point, we need to actually attach or associate a host or a cluster to that profile. And you do that by selecting the Attach Host and Cluster, choosing the actual entity in the actual inventory that you want to associate with that particular profile. In this case, we have the opportunity to select either a cluster, as I said, or the actual host itself. So for purposes of this particular demonstration, I'm going to associate the entire cluster. And I'm going to say OK. At this point, we should now be able to go into the actual Host and Clusters tab, and we'll see the list of the entities that we actually put within that profile, or that baseline. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and check the compliance on the entire cluster, which basically will go through all the entities in that list. Right? Now, it says non-compliant, and what I want to do is find out why that's not compliant with the actual base profile that we created. Now, we should know a minimum of one reason why it's not compliant is because we actually changed the iSCSI, the software iSCSI firewall configuration. So let's go ahead and select the host that we actually based it on. And sure enough, basically the rule set software iSCSI client didn't match the specification. Okay. So at this point, we can actually apply that profile if we choose to actually fix the compliance errors. But right now I'm not going to do that. So for those of you that have been paying close attention, you'll notice that the screens change. And due to that magic of technology, I took a break, and during that break I actually added an ESX host into my cluster. The real world scenario for this is that obviously you're running out of capacity within one of your clusters and you want to add a new host. And basically, because we created a profile or a host profile and we applied it to that actual cluster, what happens is when I add that ESX host into that cluster, it basically falls under the umbrella of that particular host profile. And so basically I went in and had it checked for its compliance and made it compliant, and then successfully added it back into the cluster after leaving maintenance mode. So in the meantime, there's another view that I want to actually show you. So I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to host and clusters. Again, there's my VMs and my hosts in my inventory panel. And I'm going to click on 22A because we know that's not in compliance right now, and there should be an error message in the actual summary tab of that actual host. And sure enough, it's basically saying, hey, it's not in compliance with the associated profile. So because I have fully automatic DRS enabled, we could basically go in, we could right click on the actual ESX host itself, put it into maintenance mode. DRS takes care of migrating all the VMs off. It goes in, checks the compliance again, applies the profile, brings it back online, brings it back, and then you can exit maintenance mode and then